The history of ancient Rome is full of valor and heroism, but behind the glamour of victories and triumphs lay a harsh, merciless reality, especially for those who fought on the battlefields. In the popular imagination, legionaries are seen as invincible heroes, their shields glistening in the sun and their swords bringing death to their enemies. However, being a Roman soldier is not all glory. It is hard work, constant risk, and often a very short life. What really happened on the battlefield when two huge armies clashed in a deadly battle? How does a person feel when they find themselves in the thick of the action, where every moment could be their last? Let's try to imagine what a day in the life of a Roman soldier might have been like. Watch the video to the end to find out how that day might have ended and why you wouldn't have made it out alive. The morning before the battle began, long before dawn, the troops were roused in conditions of low temperature and high humidity. The main task at this stage was to organize and prepare the personnel and equipment. The tension characteristic of all combatants reached its peak during this period. Soldiers, especially those preparing for battle for the first time, experienced high levels of stress, while veterans displayed their usual calmness based on experience. The standard equipment of a Roman legionary weighed about 30 kilograms and included a gladius, a short, double-edged sword designed for close combat, a pilum, a heavy throwing spear used to strike enemies at a distance and disable their shields, and a scutum, a large rectangular shield that provided reliable protection. Each legionary also wore armor called a lorica segmentata, consisting of metal strips connected by leather straps. This type of armor provided a high degree of protection while maintaining relative flexibility. After getting equipped, the legionaries began to form marching columns. The march to the battlefield was an important element of tactical training. The discipline and coordination of thousands of soldiers united into a single structure, the legion, were key factors in their effectiveness. This process allowed them to maintain order and combat readiness throughout the entire journey. The columns moved slowly and methodically, creating a rhythmic noise that was an integral part of camp life. This march, which sometimes lasted many hours, served not only to move the troops, but also to strengthen their spirit. The monotony of the movement and the concentration on each step helped distract from disturbing thoughts, focusing the mind on physical action and the collective goal. Interaction within the units played a crucial role. Legionnaires were trained to rely on their comrades. In battle, their lives depended directly on the readiness of their neighbor in line to cover them with his shield or provide support. This collective responsibility and mutual assistance formed the basis of the legion's strength. The march to the battlefield was also a time for mental preparation, when each soldier had to focus on the tasks ahead, putting aside personal feelings and fears. At this time, commanders gave final briefings, reminding their men of key tactical objectives and signals. As they approached the battlefield, the tension in the air grew. The first signs of the enemy's presence appeared: smoke from fires, sounds. At this point, the soldiers transitioned from marching formation to battle order. Experienced commanders focused on tactical aspects, while ordinary legionnaires concentrated on maintaining formation, checking their weapons, and preparing for attack. Amidst the growing noise, dust, and visual contact with the enemy army, the most difficult thing was not to panic and maintain discipline. Keeping your composure, following orders, and not losing your shield, which would mean losing protection for yourself and your comrades, were the main challenges. What would be the most difficult thing for you as a soldier before battle? Write about it in the comments. Moving troops to the site of a future battle is a complex and multifaceted process that goes beyond a simple walk. In Roman military science, marching was considered a critical stage in determining the army's readiness for battle. The discipline and endurance of the soldiers were tested at every step, and logistics and column management became key factors for success. The roads, often uneven and rocky, required special fortitude and endurance from the legionaries. Heavy equipment, consisting of armor, weapons, and baggage, made every step an exhausting ordeal. In such conditions, maintaining formation and combat readiness were the primary tasks of the commanders. Upon arrival, the legions immediately began to deploy. The choice of terrain was of strategic importance. Open plains where the Romans could fully utilize their tactics and formation were ideal for battle. The army did not simply line up in a row, but formed a complex, multi-level structure. A legion consisting of hundreds and thousands of men became a single, coordinated organism. The main tactical formation was the triarchy, 3 lines of infantry, one behind the other. In the first line, called the hastati, were the youngest and least experienced soldiers who were supposed to take the first blow from the enemy. Behind them stood the principes, more experienced soldiers in their prime. Finally, in the third line were the triarii, veterans who formed the reserve and were brought into battle only at critical moments. This system was not a chaotic crowd of people. Each soldier occupied a strictly defined place, shoulder to shoulder with his comrades, shield to shield. This dense formation created an impenetrable wall capable of withstanding attacks by cavalry and infantry. Commanders played a key role in maintaining discipline and order, their shouts and commands echoing across the field, directing the actions of the legionaries. At this time, the enemy army was also preparing for battle, and the tension between the two armies was growing. The sounds of thousands of footsteps, the clang of metal, and the shouts of commands created an atmosphere where every moment counted. A key aspect of Roman tactics was the realization that battle was not only a physical confrontation, but also a psychological one. The sight of enemy troops made up of people just like you, but speaking a different language and holding different beliefs, made you think about fundamental things. Questions about the value of life and the inevitability of death came to the fore. For a soldier standing in formation, the fate of tomorrow was not decided within the walls of his home, but here on the battlefield. This made one wonder what really matters in the face of mortal danger, and what do we value most in the final moment. However, contrary to this internal reflection, the outcome of a battle often depended not on fate or philosophy, but on more mundane, yet no less important factors. What if, in reality, it was not fate, but the features of equipment you never even suspected that decided the outcome of a battle? Stay with us. Let's talk about it further. The equipment of a Roman legionary was carefully designed and standardized. It was not just protective gear, but a comprehensive set of tools designed for maximum effectiveness on the battlefield. Each piece of equipment had its own specific function, and together they allowed Roman soldiers to act as part of a well-oiled machine, where personal protection was combined with collective tactics. This standardization ensured uniformity and predictability, which was extremely important in dense formations and mass clashes. The helmet, a galea, was one of the most important parts of the protective gear. Made of iron or bronze, it had a dome-shaped form that effectively deflected blows. In various modifications, the helmet had developed cheek guards that covered the face down to the chin and a neck guard that protected the neck. This design protected the head from slashing blows from swords and spears, as well as softening the impact of blunt weapons. Despite its weight, the helmet was designed not to restrict the wearer's field of vision, which was critical for soldiers fighting in close formation. The scutum, a large oval or rectangular shield, was perhaps the most recognizable element of Roman armor and the centerpiece of all defensive tactics. Made of layers of wood glued together and covered with leather, it had a convex shape that better dispersed the energy of an impact. The central part of the shield, the umbo, often made of metal, protected the arm holding the shield and could be used to strike in close combat. The scutum allowed legionaries to form the famous testudo, tortoise, an impenetrable formation where shields on top and on the sides protected against arrows and stones. In formation, each soldier held a scutum so that it partially overlapped the shield of his neighbor, creating a continuous wall of defense that could absorb the enemy's onslaught. The weight of the shield, about 10 kilograms, required considerable physical strength and endurance from the soldier, but its protective qualities justified the effort. The gladius was a short Roman sword designed specifically for close combat. Its double-edged blade, about 60 centimeters long, was ideal for stabbing, which was most effective in close formation, where it was almost impossible to swing a sword for a slashing blow. The sharp tip of the sword made it easy to pierce armor or strike unprotected parts of the enemy's body. Unlike longer swords, the gladius was light and easy to handle, allowing the soldier to deliver quick and accurate blows. The pilum was a heavy throwing spear that was a key element in the initial phase of battle. Before the clash, legionaries threw their pilums at the advancing enemy. Its long, narrow shaft ended in a massive iron tip. The peculiarity of the pilum was that its tip was attached to the shaft in such a way that it easily bent when it struck an enemy's shield. This rendered the pilum useless to the enemy and created a serious problem. The spear stuck out of the shield, making it heavy and cumbersome, forcing the enemy to either drop their shield or slow down. In addition to the basic elements, legionaries wore leather armor, lorica hamata, chainmail, or lorica segmentata, plate armor. The lorica segmentata, consisting of segments fastened with leather straps, provided excellent protection and was flexible enough not to restrict movement. This armor, together with a belt, a bag for supplies, and other small but important items, made up a complete set that made a soldier ready for any turn of events. Thus, Roman equipment was not just a set of items, but the result of centuries of experience, where each element was refined to achieve a single goal: victory on the battlefield. This allowed the Roman army to become a relentless machine capable of defeating even a numerically superior enemy. The first clash in battle was a critical moment that largely determined the outcome of the battle. The Roman legion, known for its discipline and coordination, used carefully rehearsed tactics to counter the enemy's onslaught. The basis of this tactic was maintaining battle order, a dense formation where each legionary was protected by the shield of his neighbor. This monolithic wall of scutums, rectangular shields, was a virtually impenetrable barrier for lightly armed warriors. One of the main tasks of the first line was to prevent the enemy from breaking through the formation. The legionaries prepared for the attack, gripping their weapons tightly and holding their shields forward. The tension in the ranks grew, but strict discipline and training allowed them to remain calm. Immediately before the clash, on command, the legionaries in the first line raised their shields, forming a solid wall. At this moment, the enemy advancing for the assault encountered not individual warriors, but a single, well-protected mass. In the initial phase of the battle, the Romans actively used pilums, heavy throwing spears. They were thrown in volleys at the approaching enemy, which not only inflicted significant damage, but also disabled the enemy's shields, making them more vulnerable. After throwing the pilums, which usually broke or got stuck in the shields, the legionaries moved on to close combat using the gladius, a short sword designed for stabbing in close quarters. The effectiveness of the gladius lay in its ability to inflict quick and fatal wounds on unprotected parts of the enemy's body, which were exposed when attempting to break through the Roman formation. The battle was not only a physical, but also a psychological test. The chaos, noise, screams, and sight of falling comrades created enormous pressure. However, the legionaries were trained to overcome fear and act as a single organism. Belief in discipline, the reliability of their comrades, tactical superiority, and the experience of their commanders were the only support for a legionary when it was too late to retreat. It was this collective psychology and discipline, rather than the personal valor of individual warriors, that ensured the success of the Roman army in numerous battles. Long training sessions, which included endless marches in full gear, building camps, and practicing battle formations until they became second nature, instilled in the soldiers not only physical endurance, but also a deep sense of camaraderie. A legionnaire knew that his life depended not only on his own shield, but also on the shield of his neighbor. This mutual control and support created an unbreakable bond, a kind of combat brotherhood that prevented them from losing heart in the most difficult moments. When the front row grew tired, it was replaced by the second, and then the third. This rotation allowed them to maintain a high tempo of combat and keep their strength fresh throughout the battle, which often proved to be the deciding factor in protracted battles. Legionnaires learned to read each other's minds by the movement of their shields, to sense the general mood, and to act as a single organism, driven by a single will. Unlike many of their opponents who relied on individual skill and ferocity, the Roman legion placed teamwork at the forefront. One legionary could fall, but another would immediately take his place, preventing gaps from forming in the ranks. The ability to instantly fill gaps was one of the key features of Roman tactics. This prevented the enemy from breaking through the defense and exploiting their numerical superiority or the individual skills of individual warriors. Commanders at all levels, from centurions to legates, ensured that the formation remained solid and reacted quickly to any changes on the battlefield. They gave commands by voice and signals, directing and encouraging their soldiers, turning them into a single machine for destroying the enemy. In addition to physical training and strict discipline, the Romans actively used psychological tactics to demoralize their enemies. For example, before a clash, legionaries would shout loud battle cries and bang their spears and swords on their shields. This thunderous, unified, terrifying roar not only raised the fighting spirit of the Romans themselves, but also struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Imagine, you are not facing a crowd of scattered warriors, but a huge, roaring wall of metal and flesh, every movement of which is controlled by a single will. For many untrained tribes accustomed to chaotic melee combat, this sight was truly terrifying. One of the most important psychological components was the belief in the invincibility of Roman weapons and the Roman spirit. Every legionary was raised on stories of great victories, the glory of Rome, and the valor of their ancestors. This belief was sustained and strengthened with each new conquest. Success bred success, and this feeling of superiority made the Romans even more dangerous opponents. Soldiers knew that they were part of a great military machine that knew no defeat. This confidence in their own superiority and ultimate success was a powerful psychological weapon that helped them overcome fear and pain. When, in the heat of battle, it seemed that their strength was running out and the enemy wave was about to break through their ranks, the experience gained during training came to the rescue. Reflexes honed to perfection allowed the body to act even when the mind was clouded by fear and fatigue. The legionary seemed to become part of the formation, his actions becoming mechanical, but no less deadly. Now you understand what war is. It's not heroic stories, it's fear and pain. But you can't run. To break formation is to betray your comrades, to condemn yourself to certain death. Your hearts beat in unison with the hearts of your comrades. You wait for the signal. What or who is the only support for a legionnaire when it is too late to retreat? The first clash of the armies was the culmination of the preparatory stage of the battle. After the Roman legionaries fired their pilums, heavy throwing spears designed to break the enemy's formation and inflict damage, the close combat phase began. This moment was decisive, as it determined which side would be able to maintain its battle order and not succumb to panic. Thanks to their discipline, the Roman legions aimed not simply to repel the attack, but to create an insurmountable barrier, which historians often refer to as the Wall of Death. Unlike many armies of the time, which relied on the individual skill and ferocity of their warriors, Roman tactics were based on collective action. The legionaries converged on the enemy, holding their scutum shields forward, which, when joined together, formed a virtually impenetrable wall. Each shield protected not only its owner, but also covered the right flank of his neighbor. This created the effect of a monolithic shield barrier that was extremely difficult to break through. Enemies accustomed to more chaotic combat found themselves facing not individual warriors but a single moving mass. The main weapon in close combat was the gladius, a short stabbing sword. Its effectiveness lay in its ability to deliver quick and accurate strikes to unprotected areas of the enemy that were exposed when attempting to break through the Roman shield formation. The short length of the sword allowed it to be used in the confined space of the battle formation, unlike long swords, which required a greater swing and were less effective in close formation. Thus, Roman legionaries became a deadly machine, where every movement was part of a common mechanism. Maintaining formation was a priority for every legionary. Losing battle order was considered not only a personal mistake, but also a threat to the entire unit. Therefore, legionaries were trained to instantly fill any gap formed as a result of a comrade's injury or death. Another soldier from the second line immediately took the place of the fallen warrior, preventing the enemy from exploiting a weak spot. This system of rotation and interchangeability allowed Roman units to remain combat-ready, even with significant losses over long periods of time. The psychological pressure during battle was enormous. The noise, screams, sight of blood, and falling comrades had a powerful effect on the soldier's psyche. However, Roman discipline, honed during marches and training, helped the legionaries maintain their composure. Every soldier knew that his strength lay in the ranks, and retreat was impossible, as it would mean exposing the flank and endangering the lives of his comrades. This deeply rooted collectivism and sense of responsibility towards fellow soldiers was a key element that distinguished the Roman army from its enemies. During battle, Roman commanders acted as coordinators, Centurions and other officers, standing in formation, monitored the situation and gave orders, directing the actions of their unit. They regulated the pace of the attack, pointed out weak spots in the enemy's defense, and, if necessary, gave orders to change lines. This hierarchical command structure allowed the Roman legion to act as a single, well-managed organism capable of quickly adapting to changing conditions on the battlefield. Over time, as fatigue set in, the advantage of the Roman formation became increasingly apparent. While the enemy, relying on individual skill, lost strength and became disorganized, the Roman legion could afford to rotate, bringing fresh forces from the second and third lines to the front. This allowed them to maintain a high tempo of battle and gradually wear down the enemy until their fighting spirit was completely broken. It was this tactic of attrition that often led to Roman victory in protracted battles. As the battle dragged on, fatigue became one of the key factors influencing the outcome. The first line of the legion, which bore the brunt of the clash, exhausted its strength the fastest. Recognizing this problem, Roman military doctrine developed a complex but effective rotation system that allowed combat effectiveness and a high pace of battle to be maintained over long periods of time. This tactic was based on a three-line formation of the legion: the hastati, young soldiers in the first line, the principes, more experienced soldiers, in the second, and the triarii, veterans, in the third. Each line consisted of several maniples, units, arranged in a checkerboard pattern. This formation allowed the first line, when its strength began to wane, to retreat through the gaps between the maniples of the second line. In this way, tired soldiers could rest and recover, while fresh soldiers from the second line took their place. The rotation process was practiced until it became automatic during training. At the command of the commander, the soldiers of the first line retreated, and the second line immediately took their place. This happened smoothly, without disrupting the overall formation and without creating vulnerable spots. The enemy, disorganized and exhausted from fighting the first line, suddenly found itself facing fresh, energetic soldiers. This psychological effect was no less important than the tactical one. The enemy, believing that it was about to break through the Roman defenses, found itself facing a new, unshakable wall. The rotation system was not just a way to give soldiers a breather, it was a key element of a strategy of attrition. While enemy forces, which did not have a similar system, slowly lost their combat effectiveness, the Roman legion was able to maintain a high level of efficiency. This allowed the Romans to win protracted battles even against numerically superior forces. The third line, consisting of veteran triarii, was used only in the most critical situations, when the outcome of the battle hung in the balance. This is where the famous expression, "it's come to the triarii," comes from, meaning extreme danger or extreme measures. In addition to its strategic advantage, rotation also had great psychological significance. Knowing that in case of extreme fatigue, you could retreat and your comrades would take your place gave the legionaries additional confidence and helped them overcome fear. This strengthened the sense of camaraderie and mutual support. Unlike armies where the fatigue of one soldier could lead to the collapse of the entire formation, the Roman legion had a system in place that allowed for effective resource management and maintenance of morale. During periods of calm between rotations, the returning legionnaires had the opportunity not only to rest, but also to help their wounded comrades, replenish their water supplies, and prepare for the next phase of combat. This helped minimize casualties and maintain morale. Moreover, commanders could use this time to quickly assess the situation on the battlefield and make adjustments to tactics if necessary. Rotation was not just a mechanical movement, but an element of a flexible and adaptive military strategy. The importance of rotation became particularly evident in battles against enemies who used tactics of sudden, fierce attacks. For example, Celtic and Germanic tribes often began a battle with a powerful but short attack. The Roman legions, using rotation, could withstand this onslaught, allowing the front line to take the brunt of the attack, and then, when the enemy lost momentum, bringing fresh forces into battle. This often meant that the enemy, having exhausted their strength in the first attack, could not withstand the subsequent onslaught of the Romans. And what happened when the enemy finally realized that fighting this wall of death was as pointless as trying to convince a senator to make a reasonable decision? Stay tuned. The answer to this question is coming soon. After the Roman legions successfully withstood the enemy's onslaught thanks to their discipline and rotation system, a critical moment arrived, the turning point in the battle. When the enemy formation began to waver and show the first signs of disorganization, this served as a signal for the Roman commanders. At this point, the legion, which had previously acted as a defensive wall, switched to offensive tactics. The goal was not simply to push back the enemy, but to achieve their complete defeat. The enemy's retreat was rarely organized. More often than not, it quickly turned into panic, as tired and demoralized soldiers lost all hope of victory. Throwing down their weapons and shields, they tried to flee, which made them easy targets. At this point, the Roman legion, which had previously maintained a tight formation, would move into the pursuit phase. The discipline and order that had been fundamental in the initial phase of the battle now gave way to aggressive hunting. The legionaries pursued the fleeing enemy, preventing them from regrouping and organizing a new defense. The tactics of pursuit were no less important than the tactics of defense. They allowed not only to increase enemy casualties, but also to capture prisoners and seize weapons and banners, which had enormous symbolic significance. At this point, the legion acted as a coordinated group of hunters, where every warrior knew his task. Commanders ensured that the pursuit did not turn into uncontrolled chaos, which could have left the Roman ranks vulnerable to a sudden counterattack if the enemy had been able to regroup. A key aspect of Roman pursuit tactics was that it was conducted in a methodical and purposeful manner. The goal was not simply to kill as many enemies as possible, but to completely destroy their ability to fight. The pursuit continued until the enemy army was completely defeated and scattered. This ensured that the enemy could not return to the battlefield and threaten Roman possessions again. Thus, pursuit was the logical conclusion of a battle, turning a tactical victory into a strategic one. As soon as the echoes of the pursuit died down, silence fell. The battlefield, which had recently been an arena of chaos and fury, now presented a grim picture. This phase, after the battle, was no less important than the battle itself, and required not only physical but also psychological endurance from the legionaries. The Roman army, known for its pragmatism, approached this stage with the same methodical approach as it did to combat. The main task immediately after the end of the battle was to search for and assist the wounded. The legionaries, abandoning the pursuit, returned to the battlefield to find survivors and provide them with first aid. The Roman army had a well-developed system of field medicine, and every legionary was trained in basic first aid. This work was dirty and difficult, but it was essential. Saving wounded comrades not only maintained morale, but also preserved valuable manpower. Those who could not move on their own were carried to a field hospital, where they were treated by more qualified medics. In addition to helping the wounded, legionnaires collected trophies and took inventory. Weapons, armor, and shields, both Roman and enemy, were gathered from the battlefield. The Romans were known for their ability to recycle resources, and this even applied to the fallen. Enemy weapons and armor were often melted down or used for their own needs. This process was not simply an act of looting. It was an important part of logistics, allowing the army to replenish its supplies and equipment. Once these initial tasks were completed, the ritual of burying the fallen began. Roman traditions dictated that the dead be treated with respect, and this applied to both their own soldiers and, in some cases, their enemies. For fallen legionaries, if possible, mass graves or cremations were arranged, accompanied by certain rituals. This was the final act of respect and farewell that allowed the living legionaries to cope with their loss and move on. The psychological impact of battle on the legionaries was enormous. Many saw their comrades die, and this left a deep mark. However, the discipline and collective spirit of the legion helped them cope with this. Mutual support, shared rituals, and the knowledge that everyone had contributed to the overall victory helped the soldiers survive this difficult experience. Commanders also played an important role, encouraging their soldiers and reminding them of the glory they had brought to Rome. After the battle, there was a period of recovery and preparation for the next campaign. Legionaries returned to their camps, where they could rest, repair their weapons and armor, and engage in training. This was a period when the army regained its combat effectiveness. Victory in battle was only one stage of the war, and the Roman command understood perfectly well that to achieve final victory, they had to be ready for new battles. Thus, the post-battle stage was no less important than the battle itself. It demonstrated the Romans' deep understanding not only of military tactics, but also of logistics, medicine, and the psychology of the soldier. The Roman army was not just a machine of destruction, but a complex system capable of self-repair and adaptation. It was this ability that ensured its long-term success in numerous wars and conquests. It was a time when legionaries were transformed from warriors into builders, medics, and, most importantly, guardians of the memory of their fallen comrades, paying tribute to them in a final, mournful ritual. The end of the battle and the subsequent roll call did not mean the end of the day for the legionaries. Tired, exhausted, and covered in dirt and blood, they returned to their camp. This camp was not just a place to rest, but a carefully planned and fortified settlement that was erected every time the legion stopped for the night. The evening roll call after the battle was a critically important stage that allowed the army to recover and prepare for new challenges. Upon arrival at the camp, the legionaries did not have the opportunity to rest immediately. Another important task awaited them: inventorying and distributing the spoils of war. Captured weapons, armor, valuables, and other items were collected and handed over to the quartermasters. After counting and evaluating the spoils, some of them were distributed among the soldiers as rewards, and the rest went to the treasury. This process was an important motivational factor, as each legionnaire knew that his efforts would be rewarded. However, as historical evidence shows, the psychological state of the soldiers after battle was so severe that the joy of receiving spoils often gave way to deep fatigue and exhaustion. In addition to material rewards, ceremonies were held in the camp. Legionnaires who did not participate in the battle were greeted as heroes by their comrades. They were welcomed and praised for their valor and fortitude. This was an important social event that strengthened the sense of unity and belonging to a great community. Victories won on the battlefield became a collective achievement, and every legionnaire, regardless of whether he was on the front line or in the rear, felt part of the success. Once all the formalities were completed, it was time to rest and recover. The legionaries could eat, tend to their wounds, and finally go to sleep. But even at this moment, discipline remained strict. The camp was guarded, and patrols continued to circle the area, ensuring security. Roman military camps were a model of engineering and organization, and even in moments of triumph, they did not lose their effectiveness. The night after the battle was a time when soldiers grappled with its psychological aftermath. Many of them could not sleep, haunted by memories of the battle and the faces of their fallen comrades. Roman sources make no secret of the fact that war left a deep mark on the soul of every warrior, and that psychological trauma was as real as physical wounds. However, in an environment of strict discipline and collectivism, these experiences often remained unspoken. Soldiers relied on their training to cope and continue serving. Victory in a single battle was only part of a broader military plan. The Roman command understood perfectly well that a new battle could begin tomorrow and that the army had to be ready for it. Therefore, even in moments of triumph, there was no room for complacency. The evening assembly was not only a celebration, but also preparation for the next day. Soldiers checked their weapons, repaired their armor, and prepared themselves mentally for what lay ahead. Ultimately, the evening assembly and triumph reflected the very essence of the Roman army. They demonstrated that the Roman legion was not just a gathering of warriors, but a complex, multifunctional system capable of operating both in battle and beyond. Victory on the battlefield was only one stage, followed by the equally important process of recovery, reorganization, and psychological preparation for new challenges. Despite all the tactical advantages and discipline of the Roman legions, the harsh reality of war must be acknowledged. Historical data indicates high casualties in the Roman army, especially in large battles. Estimates vary, but battlefield losses could reach 10–15% of personnel. To these figures should be added those who died of their wounds in camps and hospitals. Thus, the probability of surviving without serious injury was relatively low. Moreover, surviving soldiers did not usually return home unscathed. Many suffered injuries that left them disabled for the rest of their lives. Unlike modern armies, the Roman state did not have a developed system of social support for veterans. After serving, especially if a soldier was wounded and could no longer serve, he was forced to find a way to support himself. He had to rely on the help of his family or community, which made life extremely difficult for many veterans after the war. Glory and honor in Roman society were primarily reserved for military commanders and aristocrats. They were the ones who received triumphs, erected monuments, and had their names written in history. Ordinary legionaries who shed their blood on the battlefield remained in the shadows. Their contribution to victory was rarely recognized individually. They were part of a collective, and their achievements were considered the achievements of the entire legion. At the same time, it cannot be denied that the state did provide certain benefits. Veterans who served their full term received land grants or cash payments, premia, that allowed them to secure a decent old age. However, as research shows, these benefits were not always sufficient, and veterans who were seriously wounded and did not serve until the end often remained without any support. This harsh reality was an integral part of military life in Rome. It shows that behind the glamour of triumphs and the grandeur of conquests lay the fates of thousands of ordinary soldiers whose lives were full of hardship and danger. Their self-sacrifice and resilience were the foundation of Roman power, but their personal stories, with rare exceptions, were never immortalized. We have traced the path of a Roman legionary from his first skirmish to his return to camp, and seen that war is not only glory, but also hard work and harsh reality. The Roman army was the embodiment of discipline and tactical genius, which enabled it to win. However, behind every victory were thousands of soldiers whose lives were full of hardship. Their contribution to history was enormous, but their personal fates often remain forgotten. The history of the Roman legions teaches us that behind every great achievement lies human resilience and sacrifice. It reminds us to look beyond the triumphs and remember those who made them possible. We will continue our journey through the pages of history. What topic would you like to see in the next episodes? Perhaps we will hear the story of the gladiators, or maybe we will travel to ancient Egypt. Share your ideas in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos.